So this is going to be the first in a series of versus matchups that I'm going to do. And in this video we're going to be looking at Darth Caedus, so Jacen Solo, versus his uncle Luke Skywalker. So for the purposes of the matchup we're going to be taking them both as of 41 ABY, or as of the book Legacy of the Force Invincible. And I will preface this by saying that I'm going to take a slightly different approach to my versus videos than what you're typically used to seeing on like TikTok or YouTube. Where it's just like abilities, like battle IQ, and it shows you like none of that is really quantifiable in Star Wars. It's kind of a headcanon way of scaling, if you will. And for these videos we're going to actually be looking deep at the concepts within the story, what's set up there, and the power dynamics at play from an author's point of view, and how that's been set up in the book. And luckily for this matchup, the two characters we're comparing are in the same book. The same series, they know each other, so it's quite a simple matchup to start off with. I think this is a good one to sort of get the ball rolling. But the aim of these videos is essentially to build up over time a picture of like an accurate Star Wars ranking, and we're going to do that through ranking videos, who is it, how powerful is videos, the Ob versus video, and eventually we're going to build up a big picture of sort of what the hierarchy looks like in terms of power, force power in Star Wars. But anyway, let's jump into it. So firstly, this matchup might not be as complicated as you might think. In fact, the answer is pretty obviously in the book, and if you understand the sort of force mechanics going into this and how this works, it sort of reveals the answer plain and simple. So there's a whole narrative going on within Invincible, which is essentially Luke and Caedus playing a force vision tug of war. So what happens is that Jaina fights Caedus, right? But Luke's planting these visions in Caedus' head, basically that Luke's going to fight Caedus instead of Jaina, to make Caedus believe that he's going to be fighting Luke. And to do that, he has to stay as close to that future as possible, so that Caedus doesn't grow suspicious that, he's going to be fighting Jaina and not Luke. Because the whole thing is, right, Jacen and Jaina have this bond, and they have a connection, and Jacen underestimates Jaina for one. So Jaina's doing all this secret Mandalorian training, which is geared explicitly towards Jacen's weaknesses. So they're thinking through that whole connection and that training that Jaina's going to be able to rock up and beat Jacen through some unconventional means, and take him by surprise, basically. Which is what happens, she pretty much just says hey and then chops his arm off straight away. But Jacen thinks it's Luke who he's going to be fighting, and he's preparing for that. And as I say, he underestimates Jaina. So he's preparing for Luke's strength, and they want to keep it that way. So they're making Caedus follow this vision of the future, this path to the future in where he fights Luke, and they're trying to keep that as real as possible so that they don't compromise that it's Jaina. But obviously it's Darth Caedus, they need to take him down, so they're going to need as much power as they can get. So Luke needs to be there, but he just can't be there physically.
You're altering Caedus' visions? It's more like jamming, Luke said. When I meditate on the future, I'm focusing so hard on Caedus that when he looks into the future, I keep showing up. Then, I try to stay close enough to what I've seen to prevent Caedus from realizing that I'm trying to mask something. That something being me, Jaina said. Right, Luke answered. I stay as close as I can to the future we're seeing without actually fighting Caedus. At least, not physically.
Luke's explicitly trying to stay as close to that future as possible to make it as believable as possible. And he actually goes as far as to let his own son, Ben, get captured by Caedus' apprentice, as to not arouse Caedus' suspicions. And, keep everything as close to that future, as close to that path as possible. So he allowed Ben to get captured.
I knew Ben would be captured. I knew it before I sent you. All three of the Solos stopped cold, forcing C-3PO to step around them before he continued forward.
I beg your pardon, Master Luke. I must have misunderstood you. Did you just say that you expected Ben to be captured?
Not expected. Luke turned, revealing a face so ashen and haggard that Jaina almost gasped out loud. Knew. I saw it in the future.
Before you sent us?
Leia demanded.
And you didn't warn us?
I couldn't, Luke said. It would have changed the outcome. He would have realized that I'm using visions of the future to plot strategy, and he would have started to grow suspicious of what he was seeing.
And it works. Caedus is like, the only thing he sees is Luke, and he's like, it's always Luke, it's always been Luke, it's always been Luke's face in my head, it's always Luke. It was never Jaina. And Caedus is confused by this, right?
It always came down to Luke. It had been Luke's eyes into which he had been looking when his arm was taken. It was Luke's face that haunted his dreams. It was Luke who he saw in his visions. Sometimes Luke was chasing him through a desert landscape filled with spires and arches. Sometimes Luke was driving a crimson lightsaber through his heart. Sometimes Luke was wearing Caedus's black robes, sitting on his dark throne, ruling his Sith Empire.
You know, and then Jaina shows up to fight him. But it was still Luke that Caedus was seeing. And that's because, remember how Luke was trying to keep it as close to this reality as possible of Caedus fighting Luke? Or that extends to channeling his own Force spirit through Jaina. So that's all Caedus has ever seen, right? It's always been Luke. It's always been Luke in his visions, Luke that he fights, and he's been training for this. He's been getting ready for Luke's strength. And Luke is there. It is Luke, but it's not Luke physically. Luke is fighting through Jaina. So seeing as all that Caedus has been seeing in these visions is Luke, Caedus is preparing for Luke's strength. So Jaina actually switches on and off between Luke's strength and her own strength because she knows that Caedus underestimates her. So there's actually a lot of factors required for Jaina's victory here, despite all that power that she's dealing with. But yeah, there seems to be a great effort here to try and confuse Caedus at every single possible opportunity. And I think if anything, it just speaks to Caedus that they feel the need to still do this. Try and trick him at every opportunity, get one up on him, despite the power that they use and the massive amount of power, which is the power of the Jedi Order. It's the power of the NJO. Jaina can explicitly use Luke's strength, and Caedus is explicitly ready for it. And Luke's strength is explicitly not enough to beat Caedus.
Recalling the surge of force power she had experienced when she fought Caedus the first time, Jaina wondered if she could reach out to her Uncle Luke when the fight began. Perhaps he would be able to bolster her strength as he had on Nickel 1. But then she recalled Myrta's comment about her brother underestimating her, and she realized that calling on Luke would be a mistake.
From what Myrta had said, and what she had observed herself on Nickel 1, Caedus was obsessed with their uncle. He would be ready for Luke's strength, prepared to see through Luke's illusions as he had not been the first time.
And if you look at what's going on during Jaina versus Jacen, Luke is essentially a lifeless body. Leia says that Luke's gone, which of course in a Force context his spirit is no longer in his body, and that's because it's in Jaina's. And even C-3PO detects no signs of life in his body.
Oh dear, it seems Master Skywalker is no longer with us.
What?
Han's heart clenched so tight it seemed to stop beating.
How? Our hull hasn't even been breached.
The upper cannon turret fell silent, and Leia called down. Not dead, Han. He's in a... She paused. I don't know how to explain it. Luke's just sort of gone.
Sort of gone?
Han echoed. He couldn't help himself. He had to look.
How can you be...
Han let his sentence trail away, for Luke was sort of gone. His body remained strapped into his seat, with his hands resting on the system's console, and his gaze fixed between the shield status display and the targeting screen. But it was like looking at one of those figures in the House of Plastics back on Coruscant. Luke wasn't breathing. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even blinking. He just wasn't there.
So it's sort of like canon Luke in The Last Jedi, where he's projecting somewhere else, but this time he's projecting into Jacen Solo. I mean, it's a little different. I mean, I'd say you could still tell that Luke is there in The Last Jedi, but he appears to literally be gone in Legacy of the Force. But you know what I mean, it's similar. I love that reaction there from Han as well, when he genuinely thought that Luke had died, and he's just like, what? How? He thought they were just flying and Luke just died. But yeah, I've seen people claim that, like, oh, it's only like a fraction of Luke's strength that Jaina can draw on there, and that just begs the question, like, why was Luke completely gone out of his body then? And why would Luke only put in a little bit of effort into, help kill this guy who's like the big Sith Lord in the galaxy at the moment, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, big galaxy-altering events, yeah, I'm just going to share like 12% of me power with Jaina here, yeah. Those are the type of lengths that you'd have to go to defend Luke in this matchup. Either that or you're just missing a load of context from the books and like Luke and Jacen's characters, but a lot of the development in Legacy of the Force is Jacen trying to get up to Luke's level, and that's what happens. That's why the stakes are set so high in Invincible, and why all this malarkey has to happen in order to fight Caedus. And yet Jaina and Caedus both acknowledge that Luke was there in the fight as well.
He had been fighting Luke one moment, Jaina the next. And then they had both been there. Not just illusions of them, but presences real enough to bat blaster bolts back at the stormtroopers attacking them.
Myrta was about to tell us who cut off my arm. Tahiri remained silent for a moment, then said, "I'd think you'd know that, my lord. Appearances can be deceiving. Who was with you?" "There was only one Jedi," Myrta said. "Your sister, Jaina." "My sister?" Caedus roared in spite of himself. "You expect me to believe that?" He waved the stump of his arm at her. "That Jaina did this?" "I don't know who did that, but Jaina was the only Jedi I saw." Myrta seemed completely unimpressed by his anger. "And don't look so surprised. She's been training with Mandalorians." "Then why didn't she share their disposal barge?" Caedus demanded. He turned to the lieutenant. "Take your sample." "What?" Myrta seemed genuinely shocked. "You're a Jedi! Can't you tell I'm not lying?" "I'm a Sith," Caedus corrected. "And I don't need the Force to know you're lying. There were 2 Jedi there. I fought them both." Myrta did a good job of appearing completely confused, even in the Force. "I don't know about that, but the only one who came with us was Jaina." "Then how did Luke get in?" "He underestimates you. He's convinced you couldn't have taken his arm, at least not alone. He thinks Luke was with us." Jaina paused, recalling Caedus's confusion at the end of the battle. Maybe Luke was there.
And the whole thing with the vision is to avoid fighting Caedus, at least physically. That's the whole thing what they say, at least physically, not fight Caedus. But it's Luke who does it through Jaina.
Without actually fighting Caedus, at least not physically.
Of course, if you don't know, Luke represents the Jedi Order. He's the sort of beating heart of the Jedi Order in terms of living Force. I'll do another video going into this in depth, but essentially Luke represents the Jedi Order. So that's why Jaina is the sword of the Jedi, because it's the Jedi Order being channeled through Jaina. She's fighting as the Jedi Order in that fight. She's fighting as the sword of the Jedi, and obviously Luke is the Jedi that's being channeled through her, and Saber even makes note of this. They talk about how Caedus isn't going after the sword, but the one who wields it. So essentially Jaina is compared to a sword there that is being wielded by Luke in that fight with Caedus. She's also compared essentially to a chess piece in a game that's being played by Luke and Caedus.
She was beginning to feel like a hollow piece in a Dejeric match between her uncle and her brother. One that would determine not only their destiny, but that of trillions.
And what's impressive there is despite all that power, she still needs that Mandalorian training to catch Caedus off guard, and she still needs that bond with Caedus. Even with all of that power, without catching him off guard, with the Mando training, and without that close bond she has as his twin sister, there's no chance she can even beat him, even with the power. And that bond's not to be understated. I mean, you look at like the Anakin and Obi-Wan bond, I mean, it's even tighter than that. These guys are twins. They've essentially got one Force presence, and they're actually described as completely attuned to one another. So on top of all this power, Jaina also needs to be completely attuned to Caedus to at least stand a chance at winning. And even with the power of the entire Jedi Order, she still needs that bond with Caedus to be able to even beat him. On top of, catching him off guard with Mandalorian training, which was explicitly geared towards exploiting Caedus's weaknesses, which obviously Jaina knows. And she's switching between all these different tactics, switching between Luke's power, her own power, going back and forth. So she's like a boxer, essentially, like Rocky switches between left and right hands to like beat Clubber Lang or something. I can't remember which one it is, I haven't seen it in a while, but it's that sort of thing that she's doing. She had to learn to fight dirty, and all sorts of shit. So there's so many requirements on top of channeling the whole Jedi Order through her body. And I'll also note as well that Jaina's body is a lot younger and fitter than Luke's at this point. Luke's actually 60 by this novel, and youth is a big deal in Star Wars. That's the main reason why Palpatine wanted Anakin. He puts emphasis on it. One far younger and more powerful.
Soon I will have a new apprentice, one far younger and more powerful.
And no, Jaina is not somehow a worse vessel than Luke. In fact, Jaina has more Force potential than Luke. I'll do a separate video on that at some point. And you're probably wondering why didn't Luke just go and fight him himself? Why did he have to channel himself through Jaina? Why did they have to go through all this effort to do all this plot to then fight Caedus when he could just go and fight him himself? And Luke acknowledges that he can't go and fight Caedus without turning to the dark side. Essentially, if he's going to beat Caedus, he's going to go to the dark side. So you're not really looking at any light side version of Luke who could probably take down Caedus. He has to go to the dark side to beat Caedus. He'd have to push himself so far to where he'd essentially lose himself. So I mean, that's just like saying, Dooku makes that comparison in Yoda Dark Rendezvous, that he basically says, if Yoda went to the dark side, he could destroy Sidious. It's that sort of same thing going on there. If Luke went to the dark side, I don't doubt he could beat Caedus, but is he going to go to the dark side? Should Luke go to the dark side? No. So to beat Caedus, it's essentially break Luke.
I can't go after Caedus without becoming the same as Caedus. Which is where I come in, Jaina said. Does that mean you can see whether... I can't, Luke interrupted. I'm trying to keep you hidden from Caedus' visions, which means I can't see you either. Good. I really don't want to know anyway.
So the answer is no, Luke cannot beat Darth Caedus. At least not without plunging down into the dark side as well. And that's why Caedus can see all these potential futures of Luke sitting on his throne, Luke stabbing him with a red lightsaber. And I know people are going to bring up, like, oh, but Luke does actually, thrash Caedus around in the series. Yeah, he does, but that's before Caedus gets the majority of his growth. That's before the whole embrace of pain that Caedus goes through, which is essentially what seals the deal and makes him a proper Sith. And that's where he gets, the majority of his power growth was from that mental barrier that he overcame, which was pain, and all the sacrifices that he made. And in fact, Caedus actually admits to being weak prior to this.
He had made a few mistakes. Caedus could see that now. He had fallen to the same temptation all Sith did, had cut himself off from everything he loved, his family, his lover, even his daughter, to avoid being distracted by their betrayals. He could see now how blinding himself to his pain had also blinded him to his duty, how he had begun to think only of himself, of his plans, of his destiny, of his galaxy. Self-absorption. That was the downfall of the Sith, always. He had studied the lives of the ancients, such greats as Naga Sadow, Freeden Nad, Exar Kun, and he knew that they always made the same mistake, that sooner or later they always forgot that they existed to serve the galaxy, came to believe that the galaxy existed to serve them. And Caedus had stepped into the same trap. He had forgotten why he was doing all this, the reason that he had picked up a lightsaber in the first place, and the reason that he had given himself over to the Sith, the reason that he had taken sole control of the Galactic Alliance. To serve. Caedus had forgotten because he was weak. After Alana had betrayed him by sneaking off the Anakin Solo with his parents, his pain had become a distraction. He had been unable to think, to plan, to command, to read the future, to lead. So he had shut away his feelings for Alana, had convinced himself that he was not really doing this for her and the trillions of younglings like her, that he was doing this for destiny, for his destiny. It had all been a lie. Even after what Alana had done, Caedus still loved her. He was her father, and he would always love her, no matter how much she hurt him. He had been wrong to try to escape that. Caedus needed to hold on to that love, whatever it cost him, to cling to that love, even as it tore his heart apart. Because that was how Sith stayed strong. They needed pain to keep the balance, to remind them that they were still human, and they needed it so they would not forget the pain they were inflicting on others. Darth Caedus was going to rule not through anger or fear or even bribery, but as every true Sith Lord should, through patience and love and pain.
And I have seen some people say, well, Legacy of the Force isn't Luke's prime, so it doesn't matter about any of this, because, Luke in his prime would beat Caedus. So there's the assumption there that Luke's growth between Legacy of the Force and Crucible is significant enough to outweigh the difference here, the massive difference that there is between Caedus and Luke in Legacy of the Force. I don't think people realise that it is only a 4-year gap between Legacy of the Force Invincible and Crucible, which is the last book that Luke is present in, so it's the book that's assumed automatically as Luke's prime. And I just think it's odd that people tend to think that Luke receives the majority of his growth, between his years 60 and 64 years old. And I think the fact that Caedus was able to surpass him, within his lifetime anyway, just speaks to the fact that I don't think Luke's gonna, catch up again to Caedus and given 4 extra years. If Caedus is like half his age and already caught up to him, it just doesn't add up for me. And narrative-wise, you've got Legacy of the Force Luke and you've got Crucible Luke. They're still seen as, it's still Luke Skywalker, and Caedus is still someone who's established as more powerful than Luke Skywalker by the end of the novel. And Troy Denning actually makes note of how Crucible Luke is actually weakened from spiritual wounds that he sustained from Abeloth. And these are the years when typically in Star Wars we do start to see people start to decline. Luke's progression's a topic for another video. The point here is that Jacen Solo is someone who's established, more powerful than Luke Skywalker by the end, and I just don't see anything in those 4 years that would, go back on that and contradict that. That's still a narrative that's set up there. Jacen was still put above Luke, and I don't think anything between Legacy of the Force and Crucible is sufficient enough to close that gap. Nothing directly states it, nothing even really implies it, so I think it's clear what the answer is here. Yeah, and Legacy of the Force just essentially sets up Caedus as a threat that's just simply beyond any individual of the Jedi Order. It's the whole Jedi channeled through Jaina. On top of that twin bond, Jaina's youthful body, all the Mandalorian training geared specifically towards Caedus' weaknesses that's required to beat him. So Jacen's just set up as beyond everyone else by the time of Invincible. But yeah, there's your answer. Who wins, Darth Caedus or Luke Skywalker? Darth Caedus, almost certainly.